Let's make sure our motivation has been generated. So let's just go back to remembering the motivation we developed this morning, that is bodhicitta. To think that we'll continue to study, contemplate and meditate on the Heart Sutra, not just for our own benefit, but for the benefit of all sentient beings. In the sense that we study this and so forth to become fully enlightened. Therefore able to guide sentient beings most effectively to liberation or Buddhahood. I guess we've covered now. I guess we can move on to the next part of the Heart Sutra. I mean, having covered the 4 profundities. And the first one being the profundity of the ultimate. Well, they're not just translated, or the term in Tibetan, when it's translated, it can be translated as profundity, but it can also be translated as an attribute of emptiness. So the first profundity, or the first point, refers to emptiness itself, the ultimate nature, in this case, of the body. But the other ones are also connected to emptiness, of course, based on the fact that phenomena are empty, therefore they're possible, they can actually exist. It's not just that. Also, what's important to know is that of those 3, emptiness is the easiest to understand. The other truths are more difficult. Why? Because the second profundity deals with conventional truth. And conventional truth on the subtlest level conventional truth on the subtlest level is more difficult to understand than emptiness. Conventional truth on the subtlest level, the fact that phenomena are merely labeled, that we can only understand once we realize emptiness. And therefore the relationship between emptiness and the conventional truth on the subtlest level, I need to say that again. I confused conventional truth and conventionally existent. I need to stress that. It's quite confusing, not just in English, but in Tibetan as well. Because the word conventional is used in different ways. You have conventional when you talk of the conventional truth. And you have conventional when you talk about conventionally existent. So they're not totally separate. Conventional truth is anything that is not an ultimate truth. Therefore, form is a conventional truth. But it being a conventional truth can only be understood once you realize its emptiness. Once you realize the emptiness of the body, for instance, once you realize that, then you can understand that the body is a conventional truth. The analogy that is sometimes given is that of when someone tells you something and parts of what they say is a lie and parts of what they say accords with reality is true. Before you know the true aspect, you need to negate the part that is untrue. Right? You negate first the bits and pieces that are just made up. And what you're left with is the part that accords with reality, that is realistic. So similarly here, first you refute, you negate the aspect that, although it appears, is unrealistic, in this case, in this case, inherent existence. And what you're left with is now understanding how the body exists, that it is a conventional truth. So you know that it's a conventional truth after you've known it's an ultimate truth. Of course, we take to mind conventional truth and ultimate truth way before we realize emptiness. And we understand a coarse level of a conventional truth, a coarse type of conventional truth. That is possible before realizing emptiness. But realizing a conventional truth on the subtlest level, in the case of the body, it being a conventional truth, in the subtlest sense of the word, or in the subtlest sense of what a conventional truth is, that needs to be preceded by the realization of the emptiness of the body. Does that make sense? It's all really complicated. It takes some time to understand it, but might as well mention it, since especially these four profundities. The first one, the emptiness of the body, in this case, that's easier understood than the fact that the body is actually a conventional truth. Since it lacks inherent existence, it's possible for it to exist. And how does it exist? As a conventional truth. And that conventional truth, the body and its emptiness, the ultimate truth, are of one nature, but nominally different. So in order to understand that they're of one nature and nominally different, you need to understand the subtle conventional truth. The body being a subtle conventional truth, being a conventional truth on the subtlest level, right? Understanding that it's not just from a coarse point of view, but from the subtlest point of view, it is a conventional truth. That's one part that is realized, therefore, after realizing emptiness, but also existing conventionally. Existing conventionally is different. So a conventional truth and conventionally existent are not the same. Conventional truth and conventionally existent have a different meaning. Conventional truth is anything that is not emptiness, right? And that is possible because phenomena lack inherent existence. Yeah. Whereas conventionally existent means being merely labeled. Being merely labeled. To conventionally exist is another way of saying to nominally exist. To conventionally exist, nominally exist, or to be merely labeled. Therefore, there are phenomena that are conventionally existent, but are not conventional truth. There are phenomena that are conventionally existent, but that are not conventional truth. There are phenomena, not just one phenomenon, there are phenomena. There are phenomena. What is merely labeled, but is not a conventional truth? Emptiness, of course. Emptiness. Emptiness is merely labeled, but is not a conventional truth. Is there more than one phenomenon? Of course, the emptiness of the chair, the emptiness of the table, the emptiness of this, right? There's not just one emptiness somehow floating in the sky. Therefore, Emptiness is merely labeled, is conventionally existent, but it's not a conventional truth. What is the opposite of conventionally existent? Ultimately existent. Nothing exists ultimately. Which is why the true truth, they're equally existent. It's not that one is more real than the other, in the sense that more existent than the other. They're both conventionally existent, merely labeled, and don't exist ultimately. Yeah? I know it's confusing, especially with the vocabulary. In Tibetan, there are other words to describe conventionally existent. There's another word that describes, that can be translated as nominally existent. So if you use that and then talk of conventional truth, you don't get so confused with the terminology. But honestly, anything using it a few times, you know that conventional truth means something different than conventionally existent, even though it sounds similar. Okay. All right. Good. So I think that, yes.
Is subtle being used the same way here as subtle mind?
Yes, you could say that, as in like more difficult to know, more difficult to understand. The subtle mind is also more difficult to know than the coarse mind. We're very much aware of our coarse mind, but we're not aware last time the subtle mind manifested, which was last night. No memory, no awareness. We're not trained in recognizing, in identifying that type of mind, because it's more difficult to identify. Yeah, so not in all cases, but usually, as like a hard and fast rule, coarse, easier to recognize, subtle, more difficult to recognize. A good example is anger. I mean, in myself, of course, it may be easier to recognize subtle anger, but it's definitely easier to recognize coarse anger. But in other people anyway, coarse anger is like, like a kind of anger that induces, I don't know, an action, maybe a verbal action motivated by anger, physical action, so it induces actually a physical response, physical verbal response. Whereas subtle anger, the other person may be smiling still, inside they're boiling. But it's coarse, it's subtler in the sense that it doesn't give rise to certain actions now. You can control it. And of course, for me, very difficult to recognize for anyone. Right? Unless for the person themselves, possibly. Unless they're in denial. I mean, some people feel they never get angry. Right? And even we notice sometimes they do. So then they're in denial about it.
Is it being passive?
Passive-aggressive, you mean?
Is that what you meant? All right.
Passive-aggressive, I mean, you can be out of, yeah, well, actually passive-aggressiveness is being aggressive, but in a way that seems to be the opposite. But it comes out of this motivation of, right? So you seem to be saying something nice to the other person, but you're really criticizing. And since it comes out of anger, therefore it's actually a negative action. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Can you repeat the definition of conventional truth?
The definition of conventional truth. It's very difficult to define it, really. I mean, I can give you the definition that's in the text, but it won't mean anything to you. It's one of those definitions. It's great to debate on it, but just telling you what it is won't make it clear, really, what a conventional truth is. So I won't give you that definition. But a conventional truth is anything other than emptiness. Anything that exists that is not emptiness. That is not that state of negation of inherent existence. Okay? All right. Okay. Now, let's move on to the next part of the sutra before we also briefly address free will. I think it works quite nicely with this, with the rest of what comes the next paragraph that we'll go through. So form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form, formless is not other than emptiness. I hope that's clear. The four profundities, the way we went through them. And then it says in the, yes?
Yeah, just so that I understand one more time. The last two, can you one time make them one more, like, very clear?
Spell them
What's
out
the
again.
difference between emptiness is not other than form, form is not other than.
Well, the meaning, of course, the wording is too similar to infer what is meant just based on what is said. The third sentence, if you want, the third statement, form is not other than emptiness, refers to the fact that any conventional truth, or any phenomenon for that matter, and its emptiness are of one nature. Any phenomenon and its ultimate truth. So in the case of the body here, form is not other than emptiness. It's saying that form, that is the body, is not of a different nature than its ultimate truth. It's a part of it. It's a characteristic. Just as impermanence, its color, its shape, they're all part of the body. And likewise, its lack of inherent existence. That is also a characteristic. That's an attribute of the body, without which the body couldn't exist. It couldn't exist without its impermanence. It couldn't exist without its emptiness, and so forth. So it's of one nature with it. It doesn't exist separate from it. Initially, we may have a sense, there's form and there's its emptiness. If we have a sense of what emptiness is, we cannot bring the two together. But you remember in the beginning, I gave you that quote, that form is the appearance, is that object that depends on many phenomena, and therefore it lacks inherent existence. So those two are inseparably linked, the dependent arising of the form and the lack of inherent existence of the form. The appearance of the form to the mind and the lack of inherent existence. They're of one nature. I mean, the form and its emptiness are of one nature. Dependently arisen form and its lack of inherent existence. And then emptiness is also not other than form. Well, that seems to be saying the same thing, just the other way around. But in this case, we need to know that it means, although they're of one entity, they're of one nature, they're inseparably linked, doesn't mean that they're identical. Doesn't mean that they're the same. Doesn't mean that they're one. They appear differently to the mind. They're in fact different phenomena, but inseparably linked. Does that help? Okay, so they're inseparably linked. Okay, in the same way, of course, this applies to feeling, discrimination, composition of factors, and consciousness. It's easier to understand these four profundities on the basis of an object we're very familiar with, which is our body. How about our mind? Besides the fact that many people in the West may not even believe in the existence of the mind, they believe mind is the same as brain. So they believe that a physical entity is the mind. They may talk about the mind, but what they really mean is the brain. So they talk about the head and the heart. Head and heart, both physical objects, right? To refer to their emotions, they talk about the heart. To refer to their rational way of thinking, they refer to the head, or to the brain for that matter, to be more specific. Don't even accept the existence of a mind. Or, well, they call it mind, but it's not really what is meant with mind, with a mind in Buddhism. So, very hard for us to recognize the mind. What are we very aware of is the objects of the mind. You know, there's this analogy that's sometimes used. Our mind is like a movie projector. Our mind is like a movie projector. But we're so caught up in the movie, we're not aware of the movie projector. We're very caught up in what's going on, the different objects that appear to the mind. Those we know. The shapes and colors that appear, the sounds, the smells and so forth. Those we're aware of. but we're not aware of that which is experiencing them. I mean, we're even aware of the fact that we experience them. We're caught up in the objects. We're caught up in the experiencing entity, the fact that we think about them, we obsess over them, we're upset about them, we love them. We know these activities, but we're not aware of that which performs these activities and to which the objects appear. The movie projector, right? So it's interesting, in the movie projector, you need some light. You need this light. So in Buddhism, the definition of mind, or of consciousness at least, is that which is clear, which is luminous and knows. Apprehends, sometimes apprehend is used. So, well, not as part of the definition, but it's also the activity of the mind is to at least perceive or apprehend its object. Apprehend as in, like, even if you don't exactly know what it is, or you don't exactly know, you still apprehend an object. So something can appear to it because of the light, like in the movie projector. Things can appear on the screen because of the light, and they're thrown onto the screen. So maybe you could say that it's like apprehending something. But we're so caught up in what is thrown projected on that screen, that we're not aware of that, the entity that actually projects, which is the projector itself, or in the case of the mind, we're so caught up in the objects, and we're even aware of what we do with them, but we're not aware of the doer, right? We're not aware of that which experiences, that which is aware, unless we believe it's the brain, but that's of course not true. Okay. Which is why now the next part, saying feeling is empty, emptiness is feeling. Feeling is not other than emptiness. Emptiness also is not other than feeling, which is the way we should read this here. Except by saying in the same way, it's implied. But it goes in the same way. It goes, the four profundities can be applied in the same way. Feeling is empty, emptiness is feeling, and so forth. Does that make sense? Yeah. So feeling is empty. That seems harder, again, because we're not so familiar with the parts. What is this process of understanding emptiness? Usually, depending on how we meditate on emptiness, of course, but the most effective way is to look for the object, for that inherently existent feeling, the way it appears to us. And so we search among its parts. But if we don't know what it's like, if we don't know its parts, where are we going to look? What are these parts a feeling is made of? What are the parts? They're moments in time. A tiniest moment, so different moments of perception. So you, for instance, if you have a pleasant sensation, just a tiny moment of that couldn't give rise to the experience of a pleasant sensation. You need a certain amount, right? I mean, if I just ask you, if I make you sit here in front of you and I go like, what was that? It was too short. It was too short, right? You won't be able to recognize it. It was too short. Anyway, so I need to be careful I don't hit myself, but anyway. So it's just too short, yeah? It's not that the awareness is too short, it's that the object appears only to one short moment of the awareness. Now, if we were to take feeling, we cannot really separate these different moments of feeling, but conceptually, if we take it apart, it becomes obvious that these tiny moments in themselves that are part of the continuum of experiencing a pleasant sensation, if they were hypothetically taken out of that continuum, they wouldn't experience a pleasant experience. It takes some time. Yeah? So it's only in the form of the continuum that a sensation can be experienced. Just as you need a few moments, right? Even if it's a few nanoseconds, to take in this object and to know it. And that way we can say the example of a pleasant feeling What is it made of? What parts is it made of? It's temporal parts. Temporal parts that individually, if they were taken out of this continuum, wouldn't be able to experience the sensation of pleasure. Okay? But it's not just that. Also, there's something when pleasure is experienced, when the pleasant sensation is experienced, there's always an object. There's always something there, some content, some object. Maybe a shape or color we find pleasing. A person, when we're thinking about a person, if it's not a sense consciousness but a mental consciousness, a situation we remember, or unpleasant for that matter. It could also be an unpleasant experience, an unpleasant memory. So an object appears to it. That's also a part of this feeling, that something appears to it. And that feeling experiences that particular sensation. You see, so the experiencing activity is not feeling. The appearance is not feeling. Those sub-moments themselves don't count as that feeling. And on the basis of all these aspects, we label feeling. Therefore it's composed. It has also characteristics such as its impermanence, the fact that it's always changing. That is also a part of feeling. And it's only a part of feeling, it is not feeling itself. It exists. So it's existent, it is a phenomenon. Again, another part of feeling, a characteristic, and therefore a part of feeling. Which is why we say it has many parts that are not feeling, but without which feeling couldn't exist, and on the basis of which we label feeling. Right? It's got an object. It's got an activity, so we label the agent feeling. Right? It's got an object, an activity. It itself is the agent that performs the activity and has an object. So this agent we describe, or we call feeling. Does that make sense?
Could you please personalize this, like add an example?
Can I personalize it? Okay. All right, so the feeling of an unpleasant feeling such as fear. Okay, an unpleasant feeling such as fear. Fear is not it's not considered to be an affliction, but definitely not pleasant. Unless you like a roller coaster or something, you know, like a roller coaster ride, and that kind of fear, it's like a kind of excitement. But an unpleasant fear, let's take an unpleasant fear. So when I think of snakes, okay, I think of snakes or spiders. I don't necessarily like spiders. As I was prostrating, there was a spider right there. So I put my forehead right to the side. Woo. Anyway, so if you have a fear of spiders, or snakes for that matter, thinking of a spider or a snake underneath your bed, it leads to a sensation of fear. The object is the snake underneath your bed, and then there's this unpleasant experience. Here we're talking about it from the point of view of the unpleasant aspect of that. So you have the mind that is fearful, but together with it there's this unpleasant sensation. So the function of the mind, that from the point of view of that unpleasant experience, that's what we call feeling. It experiences that unpleasantness, which leads to minds such as running away or getting upset that I've got that snake under my bed and so forth. Now, to go back to how that is merely labeled, it's made of many different moments, sub-moments. Without them, you couldn't have that unpleasant experience. And what does it do? It experiences the displeasure by way of the snake appearing. Therefore, on the basis of the appearance of the snake and of experiencing displeasure, while this snake is appearing, on the basis of that, And those moments are also changing, not being exactly the same. Therefore, we label feeling, unpleasant feeling. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. All right. But that, because it's merely labeled, it lacks inherent existence. And because it lacks inherent existence, so feeling is empty, emptiness is feeling. Because it doesn't exist inherently, it can exist in the first place. It can exist. It's an independently risen phenomenon. It's a conventional truth. And it exists conventionally, merely labeled. And then we say, feeling is no other than emptiness. Its attribute, its characteristic of lacking inherent existence is inseparable from feeling. It's its attribute. It couldn't exist, it couldn't function without its emptiness. So therefore it's an attribute of it. But that doesn't mean that its emptiness and feeling are identical. No, the true truth are not identical. In fact, they are contradictory. There's nothing which is a conventional truth and an ultimate truth, both. So they are contradictory, but inseparably linked and not identical. Right? Nominally different. Even their meaning, not just nominally are they different, but their meaning is different. You can have two things that are different, but refer to the same. Right? The opposite of this cup and cup. The opposite of this cup and this cup, I should say. The opposite of not being this cup and this cup. The opposite of not being this cup. What is the opposite of not being this cup? This cup. Or I could say the non-inherently existent cup and the cup. Why are they different? They refer to the same thing, but they're different because they appear differently to our thoughts. They appear differently to our thoughts, right? If I say cup versus non-inherently existent cup, it appears differently. So language, of course, plays a role. Depending on how I say something, although I'm saying the same thing, I'm conveying something different. You all know that, right? Yeah. Therefore, although we're referring to the same thing, we mean the same thing, but depending on the symbols we use, depending on the labels we use, it appears differently to our mind, which is why we can say, even an object such as this cup, when it's described as cup, versus being described as impermanent cup. So cup and impermanent cup, although they refer to the same thing, they are different. Yeah, nominally different. They're different. However, in the case of the true truth, not only are they nominally different, we give them different labels, we apply different labels, but also their meaning is different. The meaning of a conventional truth is different to the meaning of an ultimate truth. Yeah. Okay, does that make sense? So you see, it goes into a lot of different areas in terms of different concepts are being introduced to understand emptiness. But if you get what I've said so far, that's fine. It doesn't get that much more complicated than what we've said so far. Yes?
Sorry, I'm having trouble here. Could you go through the four fundamental and specifically the relation to fear rather than cup?
Feeling.
Sorry, feeling, yeah.
Feeling, yes.
But specifically with fear.
Right.
The same.
Okay, all right. So maybe let me just compare it to the body. Okay? So just as the body lacks inherent existence, with regard to the first profundity, cannot be found, likewise feeling. If you take it apart, if you look among its parts, you won't find feeling. It's merely labeled on the basis of parts, temporal parts, characteristics, and so forth, activities that are not itself. So you won't find anything that is itself, you won't find anything that is feeling itself. You'll only find parts that are not feeling. And feeling is merely labeled on the basis of these parts. That means feeling is empty. And just as the body is only possible, can only exist because it lacks inherent existence, in other words, emptiness is the body or emptiness is form, similarly, a feeling can only arise and function and change and affect us because it lacks inherent existence. It is a manifestation of its own lack of existence, which means it's only possible because it doesn't exist in and of itself. It's dependent and so forth. Therefore, emptiness is feeling. And that emptiness of feeling is inseparably linked with the feeling. They are of one nature. Feeling and its own emptiness is a characteristic, is another part of feeling, which means that feeling can't exist without all its characteristics, including its emptiness, and they are of the same nature, inseparably linked. However, although they're of the same nature, that doesn't mean they're identical. Feeling and its emptiness are not identical. They're nominally different. In fact, their meaning is different altogether. And still, one cannot be without the other. You can't have the emptiness of feeling without feeling, and you can't have feeling without its emptiness. Okay, does that help? The last part was too fast?
I
Yeah.
think just going through it individually.
Okay, I'll say it again. Feeling is empty because it lacks inherent existence. Emptiness is feeling means that because it lacks inherent existence, feeling exists conventionally. And that conventionally existent feeling and its emptiness are of one nature because they're inseparably linked. But being of one nature doesn't mean they're one or identical because they're different. That was the simplest way. Yeah, okay. Yes.
Sorry, maybe I missed it. Do we have like a kind of definition of what is feeling? Is it also
There's a definition, but it won't help to understand it better, unfortunately. That which experiences pleasure, displeasure, or neither. A mental factor which experiences any of the three. So that doesn't really help. But feeling, take your experience, okay? If I were to punch you in the shoulder, what would be that feeling? Pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? It'd be unpleasant, right? Depends on how. Okay, it's like a really hard punch, right? It'd be unpleasant. Pain. So pain is another word, or it's a physical pain that is described as unpleasant. Unless your shoulder is cramping and I'm hitting it, and in that moment it releases that cramp and it becomes a pleasant feeling, right? So it's got less to do with the external input, but more with how your body reacts in that moment. Also, mentally, right? If you really like broccoli and you know there's going to be broccoli for dinner, the mere thought triggers pleasure. It's a pleasant experience. Whereas if you don't like broccoli, it's, again, broccoli. Right? So that's from our own experience. We know, is there a pleasant experience or not? If I ask you, so the thought of such and such, what kind of thought does that trigger? Right? Your best friend. If you ask you to think of your best friend and ask you, how did you feel when you thought about it? Well, it could have been pain, the fact that you separated from this person. It could have been pain, you miss this person, which is painful. Or if that's not the case, but it's just always nice to remember your best friend, then a pleasant feeling arises. And if it's just like, whatever, I'll see her soon or see him soon, and so not big deal, it could be a neutral feeling. Best is to check it from your own experience. Are there pleasant sensations? Yes. Unpleasant ones? Yes. Right?
So is there a difference between feeling and emotion?
The emotion part again. I have such a hard time to define emotions. Remember I said even in Tibetan there's not a word for emotion. They've come up with their own words, and still they can't define it. It's so hazy. We talk about emotions sometimes. Fear is described as an emotion, right? What makes fear an emotion? Why is fear an emotion? Anger is described as an emotion, right? Wisdom we wouldn't describe as an emotion. So any kind of rational mind, even if it functions in a rational way, is usually not described as an emotion. So how would you define an emotion? Why is fear an emotion? Because it moves us to do things? Maybe that's why. But then wisdom again moves us to do things as well, and I wouldn't call wisdom an emotion. What's the difference between affliction? An afflictive emotion, well, an afflictive emotion is a mind that actually harms us. Fear doesn't have to harm us, right? Fear can actually protect. I mean, like fear, for instance, of suffering, of samsara. And I'm talking about a fear based on reasoning. Okay, so I don't want to experience that, like a kind of being concerned or apprehensive, like being apprehensive. It's not that paranoia kind of fear. And that can actually be beneficial versus attachment and anger. No. Ooh. Right? So therefore, I don't think fear is it's considered to be an obstruction, a problem. A slight fear based on understanding is okay. But anything that is crippling, anything that stops you from doing things, yeah, that's a problem then. But it's not considered to be an affliction. But it still arises because of afflictions. It arises because of attachment. Because we have attachment, we're afraid that we may lose that which we're attached to, as an example. Once you have no longer any attachment, you no longer have any fear. But it's not considered an affliction as such. It's more a result of an affliction. But we could debate on that, of course. We could debate it. Anyway, does that answer that a little bit, Luca? But let's go back. What is an emotion? Why is fear an emotion? Why is anger an emotion or aversion?
Can we say that feeling is the language of the body and emotions are language of the brain or mind, sort of? Feeling is the language of the body.
No, feeling is also the language of the mind. You have mental feelings. So he says, feeling is the language of the body and emotions are the language of the mind. Language. Oh, emotions, they speak really good English. Oh, the Tibetan is a little rusty, but no, I'm kidding. This is something, we're so trained in using words in a precise form that the moment we say language, we have the tendency to take it literally. Because of course it can be, of course you don't mean it literally, but anyway, I react right away because I'm so used to it, yeah. Okay, so if anyone can define emotions, please go ahead.
I'll try.
Yes.
One where you lack, it allows you or it forces you to lose self-control.
It could lead you to lose self-control. But what about the emotion of love, of pure love and compassion? Right? I don't think pure love and compassion based on reality, based on wisdom especially, cause the person to lose control. We're talking more about afflictive emotions. That's true. I mean, being angry is like being mad. You can be as intelligent as it gets. But when you're angry, you do crazy things. Many of you may remember, I tell this story usually in this context, that however intelligent you are, when you're driven by anger and attachment are closely linked. It's not much you can do. You do the craziest stuff. So there's this story, it actually really happened, of this rocket scientist, a lady. She had you know the story? She had a boyfriend or a lover or whatever, and he was having an affair with another woman. And she was so upset. She wanted to kill her. And she had to drive all across the country, United States. She was from the US. And she put her gun in the trunk. She put on diapers to not have to go and pee, because she couldn't get there fast enough. She was a rocket scientist, wearing diapers to drive, 12 over across the country with a gun in the trunk to kill this woman. Sorry, I mean, terrible. But when we're really attached, when we're obsessed, when we're angry with someone because, jealousy and so forth, it's little control. It can be as intelligent as, rocket science. I mean, right? They caught her, by the way. They knew about her plans, and they stopped her from harming herself and another person. Yeah. Pardon?
Can I say emotion is a noun and feeling is a verb?
No, feeling is a noun. A feeling.
Really, in the end, I'm feeling.
But you see, feeling always arises. A feeling, with every mind, there is feeling. A pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral feeling. But not with every mind. There's not always an emotion with every mind. For instance, even with wisdom, the wisdom realizing emptiness is associated with the feeling of bliss. Realizing emptiness. What a relief. Emotion? No, it's wisdom. I don't think wisdom is an emotion. But it can move me to do things. So I really don't know what an emotion is. I make you discuss it tomorrow. No, I'm kidding.
In psychology,
Yes.
strictly in the science of psychology, anger is an emotion.
Yes.
The feeling could be helplessness.
Okay, so here feeling is more pervasive than in the Buddhist context, because it's more the feeling of pleasure, displeasure, and so forth. Those three. So helplessness, that's a more specific, unpleasant feeling, I'd say. Yeah. But what is the difference between them still? I mean, you've given an example. Well, how would you define? What are the defining characteristics of an emotion that help you to differentiate it from a feeling?
But feeling, it's neither negative nor positive. It's a feeling. It's the emotion.
What do you mean with positive or negative? What do you mean with positive or negative?
I feel helpless.
But the thing, that's just one example of a feeling. But what about the unpleasant feeling that is associated with hatred? That is part of the hatred. It's part of the hatred. So in itself, from a Buddhist point of view, it's negative because of association. It's associated with, it's inseparably linked to anger. So it's harmful. But still, and it's a negative feeling. So it's both a negative and a harmful feeling. Of course, here we're mixing modern psychology with Buddhism. Yeah, so it's really hard to define. Let's just agree on not knowing what it means and maybe give it some more thought. I'll think about it more. Okay. Now going through the other three. Okay. Form is also not so the discrimination. So discrimination is that mental factor. I talked about it, discerning between this, that, and the other. Right? It's this, it's not that. So whenever we perceive an object, trying to understand it, for instance, it takes some time to take it in, to take in the information. To take in the information is another way of saying discerning the main characteristics. I mean, to know something, in Buddhism we usually say to know something we need to know its definition. But what is the definition? It's the defining characteristics. It's not all characteristics, because there are some characteristics it shares with all other phenomena, or with at least all impermanent phenomena, as an example. However, defining characteristics help us to differentiate it from anything that is not it. Therefore, discernment does exactly that. It takes those defining characteristics and it discerns. That's also a function of the mind. if the mind has the potential to know, it has this function because it has the function, well, it is that, and it has this nature of having the potential to know because of having the function of discerning. Okay? Therefore, discernment. But again, if you take it apart in terms of its objects, its activity, etc., here discernment also implies that the object changes. I mean, a tree, you need to discern a tree, so you're not just looking at one aspect of the tree, but to try to take in the whole tree. Oh, the stem, the color, the shape, the leaves, the branches, and so forth. Yeah? So that's discernment. It consists of moments, of different moments, and based on that, and based on the function it performs, or the activity it performs, we label discernment. Discernment is empty, emptiness is discernment, and so forth. The same reasoning as before. And then you have compositional factor. Well, let's take consciousness first, although the order is given exactly in that way. But let's take consciousness. That primary function of the mind to apprehend, to perceive its object, to apprehend at least its object. So that primary function, from that perspective, we talk about a main mind. But again, it can be subdivided into moments, and into an object that appears to it, into the function of apprehending, perceiving. And on the basis of that, we label consciousness, main mind, actually, primary consciousness. Here it means primary consciousness versus the more specific functions, as they're also called mental factors. And then there's everything else that makes up a person, that's compositional factor, that consists of all the different mental factors that are none of the first two, discernment and feeling. It includes the residues, the imprints left on our mind, and so forth. All this is included in compositional factors, and that is pretty obvious that that's merely labeled. So in other words, what it's saying is, we ourselves are empty, and only possible because we lack inherent existence, etc. Those four profundities can be applied to the person and to that which makes up a person, which are the five aggregates. Right? And these words describe the path of preparation. These words imply or implicitly describe the path of preparation, which is that union of calm abiding and special insight, conceptually realizing emptiness. Remember as we went through the different paths? Jack, yes?
Yesterday I asked, did consciousness include all the sense consciousnesses?
Yes.
And I thought you said yes.
I still say yes.
But when you just said main mind, and then as we read further in the Heart Sutra, each of the sense consciousnesses are also defined and broken out.
Okay.
So are we speaking of it in this way?
All right, okay. So when I say consciousness as part of the five aggregates, first of all, we're talking about a primary consciousness or a main mind. How many main minds are there? 6. A main mind that is an eye consciousness, a main mind that is an ear consciousness, a main mind that is a nose consciousness, all the way to a main mind that is a mental consciousness. Does that explain it?
It does, other than as we read further, this is when we say there is no sound, no odor, no taste.
Oh, we come to that. We come to that.
I know, but aren't those the sense consciousnesses that we're talking about?
Those are the objects of the sense consciousnesses and of the mental consciousness.
Okay.
So first we're just talking about the five aggregates. We're just talking about the five aggregates. So when we talk about consciousness, we mean the five sense consciousnesses, the main, you see, it's so weird that Tibetans talk about main mind. It sounds like it's like this main mind over there and the mental factors over there. No, it's saying an eye consciousness from the point of view of just apprehending its object. Or an ear consciousness just from the point of view of apprehending its object. So those 6 are included in the category consciousness here. And then later on, the text starts dividing these different, starts categorizing, classifying, specifying these different consciousnesses. But here's just that general category of consciousness, primary consciousness. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Okay.
You said that these words describe the path of preparation. These words meaning from form is empty onwards
Yes.
until.
Yes, because the previous part I said is part of the path of accumulation. So now it's form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form, all the way to saying, and consciousness are empty, right? Form is empty is the first part, and then consciousness are empty. Up till there, that is said to, according to one explanation, but I don't want to confuse you with the different explanations. It makes sense, it works. So there's slight disagreements on that, but it still makes perfect sense. So therefore, that paragraph describes explicitly the path of preparation, and implicitly also describes the path of accumulation. Well, directly or indirectly, it's already implicit anyway, but more directly, implicitly, the path of preparation here in this case, right? Whereas previous the short answer, the short kind of concise answer Avalokiteshvara gave when he said basically, he said that, Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of, and so forth, the aggregate is also as empty of inherent nature. That part is the concise answer, right? After Shariputra asked the question, the first sentence Avalokiteshvara expresses, Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature, path of accumulation. Then, form is empty, emptiness is form, empty is not other than form, formless is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, composition of factors, and consciousness are empty, path of preparation, right? Does that make sense? And now comes the path of seeing. Now comes the path of seeing. The words that express the path of seeing are Shariputra. Likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unseized, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Okay. Those are also described as the 8 aspects. The 8 aspects. In the context of the Heart Sutra, they're called 8 aspects. So, here it's talking about not the emptiness of the body, the mind, and so forth. It's talking about the emptiness of other things that usually, which are usually not the first to come to mind when we think of the basis for emptiness. Right? I mean, like, without characteristics. So, characteristics lacking inherent existence. Being produced lacks inherent existence. So when it says unproduced, it's not saying that production doesn't exist, but nothing is inherently produced. So in other words, all phenomena lack inherent existence. They have no inherent characteristics. They are not inherently produced. They don't inherently cease. They're not inherently stainless, nor are they inherently without stains. They're not inherently deficient, and they're not inherently fulfilled. So those are characteristics. Usually we deal more with I don't want to say nouns because that's the grammatical way of describing their labels. But yeah, like consciousness and body, right? These objects. We don't really reflect on the lack of inherent existence of characteristics, of activities, and so forth. I mean, I force you to do it when I talk about the activity of waving and talking about the fact that it's merely labeled. But usually we think of tables and eye and body, etc. And so here it's a little bit more difficult. Now, before I go into these 8, I want to say something about the path of seeing, which is implicitly indicated here in this paragraph. As you remember, we distinguish between the different paths from the point of view of wisdom, from the point of view of developing wisdom. The wisdom taking emptiness as its object. On the path of accumulation, we need to generate, unless we've already done so, on the path of accumulation, which of course we reach once we've developed uncontrived bodhicitta. But then once we have entered the path of accumulation, that is to say, have generated uncontrived bodhicitta, now we need to at least, unless we've done so before, conceptually or inferentially realize emptiness, independence on correct reasons. Once we've done so, we have to develop shamatha and start to alternate between shamatha taking emptiness as the object, or concentration, shamatha taking emptiness as the object, and analysis taking emptiness as the object, until we can bring the two together, that deep concentration, bringing it together with our realization of emptiness, that analytical factor that is described as special insight. When we have that union of calm abiding, or shamatha and vipassana, taking emptiness as the object, though conceptually realizing emptiness, but still, nevertheless, it's that very stable mind. Remember fish in still ocean or still lake? Yes. So that kind of mind, once we've attained that, we've now reached the path of preparation. What is more to be done? That mind is still impeded by the conceptual understanding of emptiness. It's still a conceptual mind. It still requires a concept that is a mental image. It's still looking at the finger and the moon, both, and needs to move on to just perceiving the moon. That is, it needs to transform into a direct perception, a direct perceiving mind, a directly realizing mind. And the moment you've reached such a mind, you've attained such a mind, that is your conceptual mind, that is a union of calm abiding and special insight, transforms into a direct perceiving mind, that is a union of calm abiding and special insight, of course at all times taking emptiness as its object. Well, then you've reached the path of seeing. Right? So who cares? Who cares we realize emptiness directly? Big deal. Well, it is a big deal. Because whereas previously, on the path of preparation with that union of calm abiding and special insight, yet still being conceptual, we were able to undermine, to weaken that root misperception that keeps us in samsara. Now on the path of seeing with that direct perceiving mind, the mind can start to eliminate certain levels of the root misperception, the coarser levels of the root misperception, the coarser ones. Which compares to, if you've got a rough broom or a rough vacuum cleaner, the coarser pieces go first, and the ones deep inside your carpet, they come later. Right? Here, coarse and subtle, it's not from the point of view of understanding, but from the point of view how easily you can remove them. So the coarse misperception is easily gone. The coarse misperception. What is that coarse misperception? Is the misperception that is sometimes described as intellectually acquired. Or leave aside the intellectual, the acquired, the newly acquired, the one that is acquired, that has been acquired in this lifetime. The misperception of reality we were not born with. We are born with an innate misperception, an innate wrong consciousness that perceives phenomena to exist inherently. And based on that innate misperception, influenced by the culture we live in, the religion we follow, the philosophy we believe in, we may develop an acquired misperception. For instance, examples would be, if on the basis of my sense there is an inherent I now create this whole philosophy about this ego and the superego, or a soul that exists separately. or a permanent, partless, independent self, that I actually come up with this intellectual, based on my intellectual acumen, on the basis of my intellectual understanding of reality, influenced by religion, philosophy, other people, and so forth, I may now generate this misperception that is acquired. And based on that, so my misperception of reality, in particular with regard to the existence of I and others, other phenomena and so forth, all related, of course, to inherent existence. So I may not just innately feel phenomena exist inherently, but be convinced of it because of my understanding, my education, my experience, and so forth. And that is described as acquired, not innate, acquired. Sometimes it's described as intellectually acquired, but I don't see any need to add this intellectually. To say acquired is fine. And a lot of translators nowadays leave out the intellectually. It's hard enough to describe everything, make it even longer, if not when not necessary. Therefore I leave it out, or I don't mention it. But anyway, so acquired means not innate. Those are eliminated. Those acquired ones are eliminated when you realize emptiness directly. And the other afflictions, I should say, because that is an affliction in itself, but the other afflictions such as anger that is induced by that, anger that is induced by it, attachment that is induced by that intellect, by that acquired misperception, right? Does that make sense? So those are gone. Once you realize emptiness directly, your mind eliminates them. These afflictions, these acquired afflictions. Yeah, not the innate ones. It eliminates them.
But that's automatic.
Automatic. It's not like, excuse me, wisdom, could you please start? No. The moment it arises, even in that moment when the mind arises, they're gone. The process is described as that of kicking out a thief. It's like you kick out the thief. The moment the mind arises, that mind is like that which kicks out the thief. And then there's a time when you close the door to make sure that they no longer come back. And that's all part of this session of a meditative equipoise, or a meditative absorption, as it's also called, where you're totally absorbed into emptiness, the direct experience of emptiness. What needs to be said is that when you directly experience emptiness, you don't experience the emptiness of only the body or of only the self. No, you experience the emptiness of all phenomena without knowing all phenomena. So it's just lack of inherent existence, and no conventional truth can appear to you. It's just that mind that is like water being poured into water, as it's sometimes described. As long as we have a conceptual mind realizing emptiness, there's a sense of distance between the object over there and the mind here. We have that sense of distance. When you perceive something over there, or when you think of a friend, there's a sense of distance between the experiencer and the friend. It's quite subtle, so it's difficult to recognize. But if I were to ask you, did you perceive them separately? Yeah, you have a clear memory of the process of perceiving and the object. But when you realize emptiness, this sense disappears, the sense of distance between that which experiences and the object. The mind is like water poured into water. If you pour water into water, you cannot distinguish the water that you poured into the other vessel, right? You have a vessel with water. If I pour some water into this cup, I cannot tell you later on what was the water that was in the flask and what is the water that was in here before. It's that sense of being mixed, of being inseparable. Your mind is totally absorbed. Your sense consciousnesses are not working in that moment. They're not manifest. There's just emptiness. And nothing other than emptiness appears to that mind. And while that is taking place, that mind itself, it does automatically eliminate the acquired misperception and all the other afflictions it gives rise to. It does even more so. It also eliminates negative karma, negative, at least, throwing karma. Anyway, we don't need to go into the details. It gets too complicated. But it eliminates at least some parts of your misperception. Okay, the coarsest type. And when you rise from that meditative equipoise, they're gone. They can no longer arise. They're not just weakened, but they're eliminated, as they say, by their seeds. The potential here, seed is another word of saying the potential for them to arise again is gone. We can remove anger temporarily. Even with deep levels of concentration. As long as you have this deep level of concentration, anger cannot arise. But the potential is still there, because the moment this concentration degenerates, it declines, and you lose the ability to concentrate due to whatever reason, then anger comes back. But once you've realized emptiness directly, once you've realized those afflictions that are induced by the acquired misperception, including self-centeredness that arises from the acquired misperception, gone, never to come back.
It removes the misperception and the misconception as well. Do you use them here interchangeably, or how do you remove the difference?
Misconception and misperception are the same.
Okay.
They're the same. The root misperception and the root misconception. So to misperceive, to misconceive. Misconceive has this meaning of conceptually misconceiving. And since the misconception, the root misperception is a conceptual mind, therefore the root misperception, the root misconception are the same.
And because the acquired root misconception or perception that is eliminated, the misperception, though, is still exactly the same as the subtler misperception, even though one is acquired and one not.
What do you mean with the same? Same with respect to what?
With respect to the object of negation being like the grasping to inherent existence. Here, if we
The same object, not the object of negation, because it doesn't negate anything. The same object. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So the misperception itself with respect to, for example, grasping inherent existence.
So the object of inherent existence is the same. It perceives. It's like, as I said earlier on, well, it depends, of course. The misperception can also give rise to other misperceptions, other wrong views, acquired views. But based on the innate holding on to inherent existence, I can then be convinced of that being in accordance with reality and generate an acquired, right? A stronger, a coarser sense that I'm not born with, but I now acquire based on my innate sense. And that is the acquired root misperception. But that can lead to other misperceptions. As I said, like believing the ego, the superego, that doesn't hold on to inherent existence. Or believing there to be a soul, again, that mind doesn't specifically hold on to inherent existence. Okay? So there are different types of misperceptions that can arise from them, but they're all rooted in the acquired root misperception or root misconception. And once that's gone, because why is it gone? Because the mind that realizes emptiness directly, its object is the direct opposite of what this root mind perceives. And because this mind that realizes emptiness directly lacks the strength, it's not strong enough yet, it has arisen only for the first time, it lacks the strength to eliminate the innate misperception, root misperception, that is still there.
The subtle ones.
The subtler ones, yeah. The innate is subtler, more difficult to eliminate. That is still there. But it has eliminated the acquired root misperception. And since all other misperceptions and all other afflictions, all other misperceptions which are afflictions, and afflictions such as anger and so forth, acquired anger and so forth, since they arise from that acquired misperception, by eliminating that misperception, that acquired misperception, everything that could potentially arise from it is also gone. Right? When we say, in general, not specifically on the path of preparation, path of seeing, when we talk about the mind realizing emptiness directly, it removes all afflictions. It's just another way of saying it removes the mind grasping at inherent existence, which is the root of all other afflictions, and if the root is gone, the rest is gone. If the cause is gone, the effect can never arise. So it doesn't attack anger. It doesn't specifically get at anger, that mind realizing emptiness directly. It's not a direct antidote to anger. It's a direct antidote to the mind that, in terms of its object, is the opposite. What is the object of the mind that is the opposite in terms of its object? The mind that realizes emptiness, right? The mind that realizes emptiness. What is the mind that, in terms of the object of the mind realizing emptiness, is the opposite? Yes. It's the misperception, the root misperception. What is the object? Inherent existence. What does the wisdom realize, emptiness realize? The lack of inherent existence. They're direct opposites. If you can't have both together, you can't have both together. At the same time, anyway, you can't have. But if one has become so strong that it realizes emptiness directly, and since that is rooted in reality and the other isn't, therefore you can eliminate the other, for it to never come back. But initially, when you realize emptiness for the first time, it's still not strong enough. It is strong in terms of its direct perception, its concentration, but it's still not strong enough to eliminate the innate ones. It first needs to eliminate the acquired ones, right? It's like when you're a vacuum cleaner, whatever you have, first of course dirt, or when you sweep the ground. When you sweep the ground, for the really subtle dust, you need to go over it more times. So just one time sweeping. So to generate the wisdom directly realizing emptiness again and again, it's through repetition that the subtler levels can be eliminated. But for the first time, a certain level, like if you take the broom, and I see you sweeping. Not just you, I think the other course, sweeping the whole area around the temple. So you see, like the coarsest objects, the leaves, they fly off right away. But to get the subtle dust between the stones and between the gaps, that takes a bit of more, it takes repetition. Similarly here, with this mind directly realizing emptiness, the first time you get rid of some stuff. And then you need to enter that meditative equipoise again and again. And just as you need to recharge, I can't make you do this for hours on end. You need to take a break. You need to take a break and get back your energy, get back your strength. So to give you the example, like you use your hand to now sweep the ground and there's this really subtle dirt. So the first time you sweep over it, the coarseness is gone. Yeah? And because you're not used to sweeping yet, you do this a few times and you're exhausted. You take a break. And then next time you do it a little bit longer and more subtle dirt goes. But you need to, get back your energy. You stop again and again. And stop again. And stop. That is the process of eliminating all the different obscurations. You go subtly, you eliminate, you come out of that meditative equipoise, you accumulate merit. You go in again, eliminate something. Come out again, accumulate merit, get back your strength, get back the support. Because you want your wisdom to be strong. And how does it become stronger? Through your aspiration. You want to use it to become enlightened. So your aspiration, what do you want to take it for? That's the power of your mind. The power of your mind, it directs your mind. If you deepen your bodhicitta, deepen your aspiration, you need to strengthen that. Every time you come out of it, you strengthen your bodhicitta. You strengthen all the other qualities, part of the method, love and compassion. When you strengthen those, you strengthen the wisdom that is next time able to take even more. Right? It's like prayer. Why am I saying prayer? Prayer in Buddhism has the connotation of aspiration. Prayer is you're wishing for something, you're aspiring something. You're praying less towards an entity, unless you're saying, support me in my goal, right? But it's more like you're setting your mind. You're setting your mind in such a direction, in such a way that all your other actions become a support for that goal. That's what prayer is. Prayer is setting your mind in a certain direction and deepening that direction. And by setting your mind in that direction, all your actions become a cause for that. That's why bodhicitta is the greatest aspiration, because it's a wish to become enlightened, of course for the benefit of all sentient beings. So supported by great love and compassion for all sentient beings. And then all your actions become a cause for that. They all push you further. Because that aspiration is your driving force. If it's sincere. Not like, on Monday I'll have bodhicitta. On Tuesday I'll do something else. Don't be a hobby Buddhist if you want to become enlightened. Don't be a hobby Buddhist. If you're just like, every now and then, every Friday afternoon, I've got some time, practice some Buddhism. No. If you're really sincere, if you want to become enlightened, I mean, you can practice Buddhism for other reasons, just to have a happier life. Fair enough. It can provide that. But if you really want to become enlightened, become a full-time. So that you start, His Holiness the Dalai Lama is a good example. First thing in the morning, bodhicitta. Last thing before going to bed, bodhicitta. Together with emptiness, he uses his wisdom to take him closer to enlightenment. He uses everything. Every activity of His Holiness, because if anyone has uncontrived, spontaneous bodhicitta, it's His Holiness. You need that mind, and then everything is possible. Even sleeping all day long, it becomes cause for enlightenment. No, it's not going to be that you just sleeping, you'll take it to enlightenment. But even neutral actions that are usually not seem spiritual, they become a cause for enlightenment. Aspiration, that's the power of the mind. Your own aspiration. Your own, if you just wish for something and then accumulate the causes, that wish will take you there. But you have to accumulate the causes, and wisdom is one cause. But even sometimes other actions can act as a cause. It all makes sense. Lama Zopa Rinpoche's advice makes total sense. The way Lama Zopa Rinpoche teaches, and if you can lay a hand on his books, because that's unfortunately the way we can receive his teachings now, because he has passed away, but we still have his precious teachings. Read them, and it all makes sense. Right? So it's so important to work towards that mind. Yeah. If we're interested, of course. Yeah. Okay, anyway. 5. Okay. So, now, having explained the path of seeing at least, let's go back to emptiness that is explicitly set forth. So implicitly I described the path of seeing, and that's not the end. That's not the last time I talk about the path, because we still have the path of meditation ahead of us, which is a large chunk of this text that describes that path. But let's look at the 8 aspects. So Shariputra likewise, all phenomena are empty, would probably be better to say than saying emptiness here. So all phenomena, because to say all phenomena are emptiness is just not correct. So I think in some translations it says all phenomena are empty. I think that's actually better to say. All phenomena are empty. They have no characteristics, or without characteristics. They're without characteristics. Now, the Tibetan word tseni can mean defining characteristics, as in definition, but it can also be translated as characteristic. And the commentaries support that. saying that it can refer to the defining characteristics of something and the characteristics in general. So what is a characteristic of a tree that is not a defining characteristic?
Green.
Pardon?
Green.
Rain?
Green.
Green. Very good. Excellent. Yeah, being green. Green is a characteristic of a... But there are other things that are green and they're not trees. Okay. All right. Being impermanent is another one, right? But of course, that's more direct to say green. Okay. So it's okay to say here without characteristics. So they have no inherent characteristics. What does that mean? A tree doesn't exist inherently. Let's take the characteristic of impermanence. Does that characteristic exist inherently to a tree? Is it inherent in a tree? Or does it exist inherently as its characteristic? Why not? What do you label it on? Again, you need to take it apart to then see what is the basis of imputation that is not impermanence, that is not described as that object we are searching for, and on the basis of which we then label impermanence of the tree. What is that object? What is that object? What might help you, I'll go off into a different direction now, and I'll explain you one point that may make it clearer. To an eye consciousness, perceiving this cup, for instance, it is said that the impermanence of this cup appears to that eye consciousness. It is said that the impermanence of this cup appears to this eye consciousness. Is that correct?
No. Yes.
It is correct. It's absolutely correct. But it needs to be explained. Does the impermanence of the entire cup appear to it? No. Why not? Pardon?
I see that as a cup and it only perceives shape.
We only perceive a certain part, right? Okay, so we perceive a certain part of this cup, right? So the part which we perceive, do we perceive its, does the impermanent of that part appear? Of course, yes. How? How does it appear? How does the impermanence of that part of the cup that is in the sphere of vision? Let's put it that way. What is in the sphere of vision? What part of the cup? It's this part, right? The part that you all see. That part of the cup is in the sphere of vision. How does the impermanence of that cup appear to you? Why?
That is only a part of that cup, and that part is also a part of the...
What is the impermanence of the cup? What does that mean? Changing all the time. That changing all the time, is that appearing to you? Not that I'm saying you're not aware of it. It just appears. Let me ask you a different question. Are the atoms of the sphere of the vision of this cup that are part of the sphere of your vision, are these atoms appearing to you? Not saying that you're aware of them. Are they appearing to you? So no atom at all is appearing, but the whole thing is appearing? Without any... So I'm not saying you're aware of the atoms. Of course you're not aware. None of us are aware of the atoms. But are they appearing? They have to appear. And are they static or are they changing? They're changing. We're not aware of them, but they're still appearing. These subtle atoms that are part of this car, they have to appear. Because otherwise, if none of them appeared, how could the congregation, that coming together of the atoms appear, if none of its parts appear? Right? For a whole to appear, for a cake with 7 pieces to appear, every piece has to appear. You can't have a cake with 7 pieces appearing to you, but none of its pieces appear. And then these pieces are made of subparts, and they have to appear to you. You may not be aware of them. You're just aware of the whole. But they appear. At least they appear. You're not aware of them, but they appear. And since these atoms appear and they're in constant movement, they're constantly moving, they're constantly moving around, that movement is appearing. That change is appearing. We're just not aware of it. So the subtle impermanence in the scriptures is very clear. The subtle impermanence of this cup is appearing. We just don't know about it. Right? Very important concept in Buddhism. Very important concept. Now let me ask you again. What is the impermanence labeled on? On the basis of what do you label impermanence on the basis of this cup? The changing of these atoms. The change of the constituents of this cup. On the basis of that, we label impermanence. On the basis of, why do we say this cup is impermanent? We're thinking of this cup as a continuum, and based on the fact that each moment is different from each other, we label impermanence. So each of these moments is not impermanent. It's not the impermanence we're labeling on the cup. Each of these moments, seen together, one after the other, and since they're not identical, we label impermanence. Right? Remember when I talked about waving your hand as an example? There's also a continuum here where your hand is in different places at different times. Right? With a certain sequence, certain places, certain parts this movement is made of, and on the basis of that I say, I'm waving. Right? So here you're not taking one particular moment at a certain moment in time, but you look at different moments in time and the position of my hand. Yeah? So you all know these little, what are they called? These little books, they're like movies. What do you call them?
The flip books.
Flip books, yeah. These flip books, they're like flip movies, or I don't know what you call them. Yeah, hand movies or something. You flip through them, and because every page is slightly different, the guy goes, right? And if you flip through them quick enough, it goes, you see a movement. Really, a movement consists of these moments, right? If we were to slow it down, we would. So, based on these different, we label waving. Can you find the waving in each moment? Is this the waving? No. Is this the waving? Is this? No. On the basis of those, we label waving. That's how we label activities. So if you're familiar with this process, now we can look at impermanence. Because impermanence is change, or is labeled on the basis of change. And change, again, requires different moments in time, which are such that one moment is different from the next. On the basis of that, we can label change. So, therefore, the impermanence of this cup, we can say it appears, but appearing doesn't mean we're aware of it. When something appears to us, we're not necessarily aware. So the atoms appear, it all appears, it has to appear. It's all part of, they appear to a mirror as well. They appear to a mirror, all the atoms appear. So our mind is like that when it comes to appearance, it's just like a mirror. Things are mirrored in it, are appearing to it. And then, of course, our mind has the ability to be aware of it. Now, when we say characteristics don't exist inherently, then, in terms of impermanence, it's not inherently impermanent. Impermanence is merely labeled. Blue. A characteristic, well, here in this case, is white. It's made of many, many different atoms that are not white. Right? It's in relation to all these different atoms that are not white, and of course in dependence on the light that hits our retina and so forth. Here we can take the modern explanation. Therefore, in dependence on that, we say it's white. It's not inherently white. It's not inherently white. Otherwise, we would always see it as white, even if there was no light. It wouldn't depend on light, for instance. Okay. Even a blind person would see, because it doesn't depend on your retina. If your retina was damaged, okay. Therefore, characteristics Just think along. This is more difficult now. Characteristics are also merely labeled. Right? There's no characteristic. Being a good person is characteristic, is labeled on moments of actions that are not good, but in combination. Right? So there are moments of helping someone, pulling someone out of a swamp. Okay? Each moment, it's not pulling them out. Just holding your hand in is part of it, right? But you haven't pulled them out, but it's part of the pulling out. Yeah? So none of these moments are pulling out the person. And we label it on this moving, pulling them out of the swamp. Okay? So, therefore, this being a good person is labeled on the basis of an action such as this. Just one time you're not labeled a good person. Right? A good person requires certain actions. These actions in themselves are merely labeled, cannot be found. Does that make sense? So these actions themselves. So when we label the characteristic of being a good person, which is again, it's merely labeled on the basis of many parts that are not themselves. And what does good and bad mean anyway? I tell you a funny story. I once translated from one of my teachers, and he started his teachings saying, the Buddha is bad. Hatred is good. And I was like, again, can you repeat that? Can you repeat that? He said it again. And I said, so you were saying? And he's like, just translate. And I was like, okay. And I translated it, and I could see people's faces. Right? Like, whoa, whoa. And he went on, anger is bad, and anger is good, sorry. Anger is good, the Buddha is bad. Love is bad, and so forth. And then he said, the Buddha is bad because he harms. He harms anger. He harms suffering. And then it was clear what he was saying, that even good and bad, which we believe, right? He was just stressing the fact that good and bad are also merely labeled on independence on what we want. There is no inherent good or bad. It's always in relation to something other than itself. So first of all, it's an action that is merely labeled, and then whether it's a positive or negative action is related to the result, right? Dependent on what is the result it brings, right? I mean, anger, the moment there's anger, or a moment later as a result of that, we feel disturbed. That is one result of anger. But of course, it also makes us do things. That is, it induces negative actions which have a future result of suffering. So there's an immediate suffering, which is anger destroys our peace of mind. First anger arises, a moment later our peace of mind is gone, which means it is the result of anger. And that is something we don't like. We want inner peace. Based on that, we label, on that experience we don't like, that is unpleasant, we label anger as bad. Anger is neither good nor bad. Neither good nor bad. It just is. Right? It just is. It exists. But in and of itself, it's not anger. It's not good. It's not bad. It's labeled on the basis of its parts that are none of those. That's what's meant with the characteristic of good, of being good or bad, being desirable or undesirable, being moral and immoral. Don't exist inherently. Those are all characteristics. You see how we're going to a different level here. We're no longer talking about I and mind and tables and chairs. We're talking about the concepts of morality, the whole principle of what's good and bad. Does it exist? Of course it exists in relation to other phenomena, but not inherently. So sometimes people say, oh, there's no good and bad. There is good and bad, but not inherently. So there are no inherent characteristics. You see how it's gone deeper now? No characteristics. Nothing is produced. Nothing is produced. Think of these moments when a seed grows into a sprout. Is any of those moments production? Any of these moments? No. It's again an activity. Producing something is an activity that is labeled on the basis of moments that are not production. It's only all of them taken together, and then labeling production. It's not just this process of giving, it's not just these moments of the seed, but it's also looking at what's going to happen once the seed is gone. In relation to that, we label the seed produced something. Right? The seed is producing while it exists, and when the seed is no longer there, or when the milk is no longer there, and you have the curd now, at that time we say the milk has produced the curd. Therefore, producing something, we label that on all the moments of the seed of the milk changing after the bacteria were added that create the curd. On the basis of these moments changing, slowly changing, and in relation to what will eventually become of the milk, we label at the time of the milk, it is producing the curd. That's it. No inherent production. See how the whole world falls apart? Consists of parts other than itself, and then we draw lines around them. That's our labeling. Does that make sense? In and of itself? No. Merely labeled? Yes. So you see, it's much deeper than just saying no I. It goes much further. And it requires a lot more reflection. But do you know more about emptiness than you did 3 days ago? Yes. After we go through this. And that's, of course, the whole goal of this exercise, right? That you deepen your understanding, because that's what the sutra does. It goes deeper and deeper, especially with these 8 aspects. Okay, let's take a break, 15 minutes, and I'll do some meditation.